She was my friend's mom's best friend, and one sentence changed everything. If you stay quiet, nobody will ever know. The weekend had arrived quietly, with sunlight spilling softly through the living room windows, casting long, warm streaks across the polished wooden floor. I had been invited to help my friend's family with some minor household errands, a seemingly ordinary task, yet today, everything felt different. She was there, her presence subtle, yet impossible to ignore. She moved through the room with an effortless grace, carrying herself like someone entirely at ease with the world, yet there was an undercurrent of something more tender beneath her confidence. I noticed the small things first, how her fingers lingered for a moment on the edge of the table as she adjusted a vase, the way she hummed softly to herself while tidying up, and the quiet smile that played at the corners of her lips when she glanced my way. It wasn't a smile that demanded attention, it was one that drew it naturally, like a gentle tide. I found myself watching, careful not to make it obvious, yet fascinated by the contrast between her maturity and the lightness of her presence. There was something intoxicating about it, the way she moved, the warmth in her voice when she thanked me for helping with the groceries, the subtle way her eyes met mine before quickly glancing away. It wasn't flirtation in the obvious sense, it was quieter, more layered, and infinitely more compelling. Every movement, every small gesture, seemed deliberate yet effortless. The way she paused to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle brush of her hand against the arm of a chair, even the faint laughter she let out when my friend joked from across the room, it all added up to something I couldn't name yet. I felt drawn into her orbit, aware of the years between us but strangely unbothered by it. There was wisdom in her gaze, a quiet depth that hinted at experiences I could only imagine, yet there was also a warmth, a kind of openness that made her approachable in a way that felt rare. As I helped her rearrange some books on the living room shelf, our hands brushed once, lightly, almost accidentally, and I felt a spark I wasn't expecting. My chest tightened, awareness sharpening in an almost dizzying way. The scent of her perfume was subtle but distinct, mingling with the faint aroma of the afternoon sunlight, and for a moment, I felt suspended between admiration and nervousness. Her hand lingered for just a fraction longer than necessary, and I caught her eye again. There was a flash of recognition there, fleeting but undeniable, before she returned her attention to the shelf as if nothing had happened. I reminded myself to stay grounded, to respect the boundaries that were so clearly there, yet I couldn't stop the quiet thrill that ran through me every time our paths crossed in the room. The dynamic was unspoken, delicate, and entirely intoxicating. In that golden afternoon light, amidst the mundane rhythms of a suburban home, I realized that something was shifting, slowly, imperceptibly, but with a force that I knew would only grow in the days to come. And in that realization, I felt the first stirring of a story I wasn't sure I was ready to tell, a story of admiration, subtle attraction, and quiet tension that had begun, almost imperceptibly, with a simple glance. The rain had begun softly, tapping against the kitchen windows with a rhythmic calm that made the room feel warmer by contrast. Steam curled from mugs of tea, carrying a faint aroma of chamomile and honey, and the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the spaces between our conversation. I had come to help with a small cooking task, a favor that felt simple enough, until the small accident happened. A cup slipped from my grasp, tipped by my own clumsy nerves, and tea spilled across the counter. Instantly she was there, moving closer than she usually did. Her hand rested lightly on my forearm as she steadied me, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to vanish. Her touch was gentle but grounding, warm against the slight chill of the kitchen. I could feel the pulse of her wrist through the thin fabric of her sleeve, and my chest constricted in a way that was entirely new, a mixture of surprise, admiration, and an inexplicable longing. Her eyes met mine, calm and assessing, but there was something beneath the surface, a flicker of amusement, a trace of curiosity, and perhaps even recognition of the unspoken tension that had been building silently over the past week. We didn't speak at first, words weren't needed. The brush of her fingers against my arm, the subtle way her body leaned slightly closer as she steadied me, spoke more than any sentence could. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the steam from the tea, a delicate floral note that lingered in the space between us. Even as I apologized for being clumsy, she only smiled, a small, knowing smile that made my stomach tighten. Her lips curved with the ease of someone confident in themselves, yet the warmth behind her eyes suggested a quiet vulnerability, an openness she rarely showed to anyone. There was a pause, just long enough that my mind spun with possibilities, yet short enough that propriety remained intact. It was a balance, delicate and tantalizing. When she finally stepped back, it wasn't abrupt. Our hands lingered near each other for just a second longer than necessary, a fleeting contact, but enough to set my senses alight. I felt the subtle tremor of excitement run through me, not just from her touch, but from the way the moment had unfolded, unplanned, intimate, and quietly electric. Her presence seemed to fill the small kitchen, the soft lighting bouncing off her hair, the hum of rain outside acting as a soundtrack to a moment I knew I wouldn't forget. As she cleaned up the spill with practiced efficiency, I noticed the way she moved, each gesture fluid, composed, yet imbued with an almost imperceptible elegance that made the mundane task of wiping a counter feel significant. I caught myself lingering on her small movements, memorizing the curve of her shoulder, the subtle tilt of her head, the gentle cadence of her voice when she reassured me that accidents happen. By the time the spill was cleaned, I was acutely aware of the shift that had taken place. The atmosphere between us had subtly changed, heavier with unspoken questions, lighter with playful familiarity, and charged with a kind of curiosity either of us dared to name out loud. That fleeting touch, accidental or not, had broken the invisible boundary that had kept our worlds separate, leaving me more aware of her presence than ever before, and more eager for the moments to come. Later that evening, I found myself walking alone through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, the soft glow of amber streetlights casting long shadows over the pavement. The rain had tapered off, leaving a crisp scent of damp earth and fresh air that filled my lungs with every breath. My hands were buried deep in my jacket pockets, though the warmth I felt had nothing to do with the chill. It was her, the echo of her presence, her touch on my arm earlier, the fleeting warmth of her hand, the curve of her smile, replaying relentlessly in my mind. I walked slowly, deliberately, trying to untangle the web of emotions knotting my chest. Admiration, curiosity, desire, guilt, they all jostled for attention, each feeling both exhilarating and unnerving. She was my friend's mom's best friend, an older woman whose confidence and quiet elegance drew people to her naturally. And yet, beneath the polish, I sensed vulnerability, a softness she revealed only in fleeting moments, and it pulled at me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I thought back to the brush of her fingers on my arm, the almost imperceptible lingering of her touch, the way her eyes had met mine before quickly glancing away. That single moment, brief as it was, had left an imprint I couldn't shake. My chest tightened at the memory, a mixture of longing and restraint. I reminded myself firmly, boundaries exist for a reason. There was the weight of social expectation, the respect owed to my friend and to her, the moral line that felt suddenly both obvious and invisible. And yet, there was a pull I couldn't ignore. I remembered the sound of her laughter, soft but vibrant, how it had seemed to resonate in the very air around me, filling the spaces where hesitation had previously lived. I remembered the scent of her perfume mingling with the steam of tea in that kitchen, subtle and inviting, lingering on my senses long after the moment had passed. Every detail returned to me with startling clarity, and with each recall, the tension in my chest deepened. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was fascination, a magnetic awareness of her presence, and an appreciation for the depth I glimpsed in her. She carried herself with a balance of confidence and quiet vulnerability, and I found myself yearning not only for proximity but for understanding, for connection, for a fleeting sense of intimacy that didn't yet have words. I paused at a corner, staring at the streetlights reflecting on wet asphalt, and wondered if I should tell someone, or anyone, about this confusing mixture of admiration and longing. But her words from earlier lingered, though I hadn't heard them directly yet, the kind of sentence that could change everything, if it were ever spoken. And I realized that even thinking about it made my pulse quicken, the line between curiosity and desire blur in a way that was both thrilling and dangerous. walking the empty streets, I understood something fundamental. The tension wasn't going to dissipate on its own. It was alive, simmering quietly, feeding on moments, glances, and memories. And I, caught between morality and fascination, had no idea how to navigate it, only that I wanted to, desperately, carefully, and with a kind of reverence I hadn't felt for anyone in a long time. The weekend arrived again, bringing with it a sense of anticipation I could no longer ignore. This time, the setting was a small café tucked into a quiet corner of the city, its warm amber light spilling onto the sidewalk, mingling with the crisp autumn air. Inside, the low hum of conversation and clinking coffee cups created a cozy backdrop that seemed almost tailored for moments like this. I arrived early, nervously shifting my weight between the soles of my shoes, only to be met moments later by her effortless presence. She entered with the same graceful composure that had captivated me the first time I noticed her, and yet there was a casualness to her smile that made the world around us feel both intimate and ordinary. Her eyes met mine immediately, warm and knowing, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, a mixture of excitement, admiration, and restraint. The moment she settled into the chair across from me, the subtle scent of her perfume drifted toward me, blending with the rich aroma of coffee and baked goods. It was comforting, familiar, and disarmingly intimate. Conversation began with easy topics, the weather, small anecdotes from our week, yet there was a rhythm to our exchange that felt almost choreographed, a dance of words and glances. I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn to the cadence of her laughter, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She spoke with a calm confidence, punctuating her sentences with small, deliberate gestures, a flick of her hair behind her ear, the delicate tap of her fingers on the table, the way she tilted her head when listening. Each motion seemed mundane, yet to me, they were loaded with unspoken energy. The flirtation was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else. A hand brushed mine briefly as she reached for her cup, lingering just long enough to spark a jolt of awareness. Our eyes met in that suspended moment, and for an instant, the air between us felt charged, heavy with unspoken curiosity and delicate tension. She caught my glance and smiled softly, a small acknowledgement of the magnetic pull that neither of us dared to name aloud. Humor became a vehicle for connection. A teasing comment about my slightly overcooked latte order prompted a shared laugh that seemed to echo longer than it should have, filling the spaces of the cafe with warmth and complicity. I noticed the subtle way her body leaned toward mine during these moments, the slight narrowing of the distance between us without ever violating propriety. Every glance, every brush of her hand against the table or mine, carried a quiet weight, a tension that made the ordinary seem extraordinary. Time passed in a haze of conversation, warmth, and subtle longing. The chatter around us faded into the background, leaving only the soft hum of intimacy that neither of us needed words to define. By the time we stood to leave, I was acutely aware of the gap between us, both literal and metaphorical, and yet, I felt a closeness that made it nearly impossible to step back into the outside world. The cafe, with its cozy warmth and muted lights, had become a space suspended in time, a quiet stage for the slow-burn connection that was steadily growing between us. And as we walked out into the crisp autumn evening, side by side, I realized that this casual meeting, this subtle flirtation, was no longer accidental. It was deliberate, yet delicate, and it left me more aware of her, more captivated by her, and more aware than ever of the unspoken thread that tied us together. It was one of those quiet nights when the city seemed to hold its breath. The streets were nearly empty, lit only by the soft glow of street lamps and the occasional flicker of neon from a distant shop. We walked side by side, the cool breeze tugging lightly at our clothes, carrying with it the faint scent of rain lingering from the day before. The sound of our footsteps on the damp pavement was steady, almost hypnotic, and for a long moment neither of us spoke, the silence itself carrying a weight that felt both fragile and electric. She broke it first, her voice soft, almost hesitant, but infused with an honesty that drew me in immediately. She began sharing something deeply personal, a story of loneliness that had crept in over years, of moments when she felt unseen despite her outward confidence. Her words were deliberate but unguarded, carrying the kind of vulnerability that rarely left anyone in her presence unshaken. I listened, leaning slightly closer, careful not to intrude, yet acutely aware of every shift in her tone, every flicker of expression across her face. Her eyes, when they met mine, were luminous with a quiet intensity. There was no expectation in her gaze, only the bare honesty of someone willing to show themselves fully to another. I could feel the tension coiling inside me, a mixture of empathy, admiration, and something far more personal, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken connection that had been threading its way through our encounters. My hands, idle at my sides, itched to reach out, to offer comfort, but I hesitated, aware of the fragile line we were walking. At one point, a gust of wind swept between us, tugging her hair gently across her face. I instinctively reached out, brushing it aside, my fingers grazing her cheek lightly. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a warmth spreading through me, a jolt that was both thrilling and terrifying. Her eyes softened at the touch, a faint shiver passing through her, and I realized how deeply the simple act of presence could convey unspoken understanding. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the world had contracted to just the two of us, the hum of the distant city fading into irrelevance. We paused on a small bridge overlooking the softly rippling water below, the lights reflecting like scattered stars on its surface. She turned slightly toward me, her gaze steady yet gentle, and for a moment, I felt the intensity of everything unsaid. It was a confession of sorts, though not spoken aloud, a quiet, mutual acknowledgement of the tension, curiosity, and connection that had been simmering between us. The air between us felt charged, almost fragile, as if the slightest word or movement could tip the balance into something neither of us was fully ready to name. I wanted to speak, to bridge the gap with words, but the vulnerability in her presence made me pause. Instead, I let my hand brush against hers, a small gesture heavy with meaning. She didn't pull away. Our fingers lingered near each other, the closeness comforting and electric all at once. It was a silent promise, a recognition of mutual understanding, of a desire tempered by caution, and of emotions that were slowly, deliberately unfolding. In that quiet moment, under the dim glow of streetlights and the reflection of water, I realized that our connection had grown far deeper than casual admiration. It had become an unspoken intimacy, delicate yet undeniable, and for the first time, I understood the quiet thrill of emotional closeness, the kind that left you both terrified and elated, craving more without ever forcing it. The gathering was small, intimate, and warmly lit, a private dinner at her home, with soft candles flickering on the dining table and quiet music humming in the background. The golden glow bathed the room, throwing soft shadows against the walls, and the aroma of roasted vegetables and fresh bread made the space feel cozy, familiar, and deceptively ordinary. Yet beneath the surface of laughter and casual conversation, there was a current, subtle, electric, and unmistakable, flowing between us. She moved through the room with that effortless composure I had come to notice so well, her hands adjusting a napkin, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle tilt of her head as she listened to someone speak. I watched, unable to tear my eyes away, acutely aware of every gesture, every fleeting expression. There was humor in her glance, warmth in her smile, and a quiet confidence that drew everyone's attention, yet it was the moments she looked at me, the ones nobody else noticed, that left me breathless. As the evening wore on, I found myself drawn into her orbit more and more. We moved closer across the table when speaking quietly to each other, our knees brushing under the table, a touch light enough to be accidental yet heavy with meaning. I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her, the pulse of life that made proximity electric, and the faint scent of her perfume, mingling with the smell of roasted food, created a sensory imprint that I could not ignore. And then, in a quiet pause while everyone else was distracted with dessert, she leaned slightly toward me, her voice low and steady, almost a whisper. "If you stay quiet, nobody will ever know." The words themselves were simple, almost casual, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. Her gaze held mine, steady and knowing, and in that instant, the world seemed to narrow until it was just the two of us, standing on the precipice of something neither of us dared to name. Time felt suspended. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the intensity of recognition, the realization that she knew, that she felt the same tension, the same curiosity, and perhaps even the same longing. There was a playful challenge in her expression, softened by warmth, and a promise unspoken. It wasn't a demand, nor a confession in full. It was a delicate invitation to acknowledge what had been simmering beneath the surface. Our fingers brushed again as we reached for the same dish, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver up my arm. The air between us seemed charged, alive with possibility, yet carefully restrained. Every glance, every pause, every subtle smile was a negotiation of boundaries and desire, a slow dance of emotions that neither of us wanted to rush. The intimacy in that moment was almost palpable, the shared breaths, the quiet understanding, the magnetic pull of proximity that left my chest tight and my senses heightened. By the end of the evening, as candles burned low and guests began to drift away, the unspoken tension remained, heavier now, undeniable. Yet it was comforting in its delicacy, thrilling in its restraint. The line between friendship and something more had blurred completely, leaving only the quiet understanding that what existed between us was real, mutual, and ready, though either of us would force its unveiling too soon. In that room, lit softly by candlelight, I realized the slow burn of connection had reached its peak, waiting for the right moment to transform into something enduring. The night had deepened, and the city beyond the balcony was a mosaic of lights, warm amber glows from windows, distant car headlights glinting like tiny fireflies, and the soft hum of life continuing below. We sat side by side, wrapped in a shared blanket, the cool breeze tugging gently at our clothes and tousling her hair. She leaned slightly toward me, the warmth of her shoulder brushing against mine, a quiet reassurance in its simplicity. For the first time in days, I felt entirely present, entirely seen. The tension that had simmered for weeks, ever since our first accidental touch, had transformed into something softer, something sustaining. We didn't need words to articulate it. The closeness between us spoke volumes. Every brush of her fingers against mine, every shared glance, carried an intimacy that was at once exhilarating and grounding. Her presence, once intimidating in its quiet elegance, now felt like a harbor, a space where I could exist without pretense, where admiration, attraction, and trust could coexist peacefully. We spoke sparingly, letting silence settle comfortably between us. Her voice, when she did speak, was warm, calm, and deliberate, threading small stories and reflections into the night air. I listened, captivated not just by her words but by the way she shared them, the tilt of her head, the gentle lift of her eyebrows, the soft cadence of her laughter. It was an intimacy that transcended conversation, a dialogue of presence, awareness, and subtle connection. At one point, she shifted slightly, brushing her hair back behind her ear, and my hand instinctively reached out, fingers grazing hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand linger near mine, our fingers occasionally brushing, creating a rhythm that was both tentative and deliberate. Each touch, light and respectful, carried the weight of unspoken understanding. It was in these small moments that the depth of our connection revealed itself, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, consistent acknowledgement of each other's presence and importance. The cityscape below glimmered like a sea of stars, reflecting our own tentative emotions, fragile yet luminous. We leaned slightly closer, shoulders touching, and I felt the gentle warmth of her breath in the evening air. There was a trust in this closeness, a reassurance that boundaries could be respected while still exploring the tender space between us. I realized that this was what I had been seeking, an emotional intimacy that was real, profound, and unhurried, allowing affection, admiration, and desire to coexist safely and beautifully. As the night wore on, we didn't declare anything explicitly. There was no dramatic confession, no sudden kiss, no need for spectacle. The fulfillment lay in the simplicity of presence, in the knowledge that we had reached a mutual understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of attraction and care. The slow-burn tension that had guided our encounters now settled into a warm, steady flame, leaving me with a profound sense of peace, excitement, and gratitude. In that balcony, Under the soft glow of city lights and a whispering breeze, I understood that love didn't always need to be rushed. Sometimes, it existed in the quiet, the subtle touches, the shared silences, and the trust that grew slowly but unshakably. And in her presence, I had found that rare, enduring connection, a fulfillment that was gentle, profound, and perfectly complete. If you enjoyed this slow-burn tale of unspoken attraction and quiet longing, make sure to hit like and subscribe for more age-gap romance stories that tug at the heart. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Which moment in this story left your heart racing the most?